Hey guys, so I'm gonna go through the notes with you so that you can more easily fill out your spiced notes. The spiced notes are the ones that are attached to the page. You're supposed to click the blue link. So we're gonna kind of talk about the difference between Neolithic versus Paleolithic. And the reason why we're talking about that is because in history what we often do is we differentiate between eras or large periods of time. And usually there's something that occurs that changes the period of time we're talking about. And so the thing that changes, that moves humans from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, is this advent of farming, this development of farming, domestication of plants and animals, and it's sometimes called the agricultural revolution. So you'll see those two terms or those two phrases kind of interchangeably. So when we talk about the Paleolithic, we're talking about the things that you looked at yesterday, those videos. This is the Ice Age. This is before agriculture, when people were hunter-gatherers and when they had to move around to find food. They were nomadic, and it led to huge migratory changes, and people were, had to move to find food and to get away from potential dangerous situations. Well, once people start to settle down and they find all of these various places, they are able to start actually getting used to staying in one place, and they start to create stable food sources through the use of agriculture, through the use of actually cultivating various plants and animals to help create consistent food sources. So what prompted this? Now, remember, the Paleolithic was the Ice Age. So when the Ice Age ended, that meant that the climate overall in the world was warmer. Right, so that makes farming easier when things are not covered in blocks of ice. As a result, you have more people. So when you have more people, you have to figure out a way to feed those people. And that's a great thing about humans, is in general we tend to be problem solvers. And so at this point we have a problem and we need to figure out how to deal with all of these new people. So what happens is, because of the agricultural revolution, large groups of what used to be hunter-gatherers became settled communities. When they settle, they create farms, they create agricultural opportunities, they domesticate animals, which then creates a food surplus, which means that now you have a small population, a small part of the population that can make enough food for everyone, which frees up all those people who aren't farming to then work on other things like metalwork and weapons and creating new inventions to make the quality of life better. Then you also, from there, you have people who start exploring intellectual things like art and philosophy and writing. And then you start having architecture, and you have new developments. From there you have even more technology. And so from there you start creating defined social structures. All right? So that's basically the evolution of the agricultural revolution. That's the change over time. What's going to happen because of this one thing, right? So from there we're going to have different civilizations. And yesterday I asked you to define in your own words what you thought a civilization was. What does that mean, right? So we're going to get more to that, but from there, if you want to look at it like kind of a tree, from there, the agriculture, being able to actually create a food surplus, domesticating animals and planting and farming, then leads to this like explosion of various other developments within a society, within a group of people. And so because you have that surplus, it leads to that specialization of labor, which leads to new economic opportunities, which then creates a hierarchy and a civilization. And then you have all of these other things that come out of the creation of a civilization. Social classes, technological advances, government, armies, specialization of labor, long distance trade, what? Cultural diffusion, more people are going to be like me, awesome. Conflict, not so awesome, now we have war. And then, of course, eventually the development of large centralized kingdoms and empires. So now we're going to get to the spiced chart. All right, so with each slide, I'm going to go back and forth, Paleolithic, Neolithic, all right? So we'll start with social and we'll work our way down to demographic. So social. Paleolithic social was a norm. So equality was a norm. Because everyone was a hunter-gatherer, because everyone had to contribute to the group's needs, everyone had to do it in the same way, and everyone worked toward a common goal. So also, because life was so difficult in the Paleolithic era, gender equity was also a thing because men and women had to work to survive. Because essentially human life was built around survival. It wasn't about creating a better life, it was just maintaining a life, staying alive, not getting killed by a large beast of prey, right? Oftentimes they created very simplistic animism type of religions or nature religions, very polytheistic, multiple gods that they would worship. Most specifically, usually it's grounded in the idea of earth, because the earth is what provides them with food and water and the things they need to live. Now, Neolithic social, the society in the Neolithic era, is because of this ability to settle and create agriculture, these social classes now start to develop. And usually it's going to be based on your wealth, the accumulation of wealth, and how your job is seen, its importance within the society. Eventually we will start to include we as humans will start to include things like skin color to create that hierarchy. But in the beginning, it was more on wealth accumulation and on job status. So what this does is it immediately starts to create these inequalities, because the people who are at the top of the social classes are going to want to stay at the top. So they are going to create policies and laws and whatnot that will benefit them. And not necessarily laws, but just kind of like the norms of the society. At the same time, women will lose their equal status, and their primary role will be about creating more babies and then taking care of all of those babies that they create, right? So this increasingly confines them to their home. So now let's go Paleolithic political, right? Remember, the whole focus is they do not have any kind of like really big structure that's keeping them together. There's no common thread other than they're trying to stay alive. Because of the equal status in society, there's no ruling class over a ruled class. There's no formal government, there's no laws, and because people are constantly moving and they're just fighting like big animals, they tend to not necessarily fight with each other unless they're fighting over food. So you don't have standing armies, you don't have people who are focused on being warriors because everyone is a warrior, because everyone is a hunter. And so when you encounter another group, it's just the whole group against the other whole group, right? Often you had tribal elders. These are the people that lived the longest, so they were the wisest, and so they made all of the decisions for the group. Neolithic political, however, because you have people that have idle time, so to speak, people aren't quite as, prevented from living. So they start to create these complex government structures, because here's the thing, your populations are getting bigger. So as you get more and more people together, you need to have something that's going to organize all of these people. And so that requires more and more complex government systems. It's going to require eventually regulations. It's ways to defend your food supplies, because when you create that surplus, you create enough for your own population. You're not trying to feed the world, you're just trying to feed your people, right? Oftentimes you will have a single person at the top of your social or your political structure. That's going to be your king or your emperor. They're very patriarchal governments, meaning that men have the power and privilege. Remember, women are more and more confined to the home because their job becomes more and more about the children that they bear and raise. All right? Paleolithic intellectual. So, Paleolithic societies created useful tools, but everything was really basic. So they used what they could find: stones, bones from animals they killed, clay, wood from trees, whatever. And they would make these very rudimentary tools that would help them to continue to hunt or build temporary homes, or even if they moved into colder climates, create clothing. Neolithic intellectual, they will take all of that learned knowledge from the Paleolithic and they will exponentially increase their technology and their thought around that technology. So they'll start creating things like pottery, think bowls and plates to hold food in. They will develop religion. Instead of this like very individual kind of worship of Mother Earth, there will be a standardized religion for people. There will, of course, the adoption of agriculture, painting, social classes. People will start really working with metal. So they'll start digging out metal ore and they'll start, firing it and flattening it and creating much stronger tools. So what happens is the people who are still using, say, bone and stone, going against now a group of people who have things like metal spears and arrowheads. The two don't really, one is more effective than the other, right? So this is big. Paleolithic culture, people created cave paintings and simple statues. So this is what we looked at yesterday, or whenever you looked at it, but there wasn't like an organized religion, but people, again, they praised Mother Earth. Neolithic cultural, it gets far more advanced. People actually create gods and goddesses to worship, and then they create the statues around that. They create architecture, temples, pyramids, ziggurats, and these become important features of their civilization. They start creating writing elements and language elements that allow them to communicate within at least their own society, if not in other societies. It helps them start to record their history. Paleolithic economic. So what that means is, what are people doing? How are people making their money, spending their money? Except at this point in the Paleolithic era, people aren't about money. Remember, they're about survival. So their economic, their trade, what they do for a job is they take care of their community. And how you take care of your community is you defend your people as warriors and you hunt big game so that you can feed your people. People only hunted and gathered what they needed because they were nomadic. They couldn't create stores. They had no way to really preserve food, so they would only take what they needed. All right, there was very little trade, if any at all. Neolithic, however, when you have a surplus and you have specialization, you now allow this idea of creating different jobs, and then people will trade for what they need. So we didn't necessarily have currency yet, but people with their goods and services that they have, that they can create, they then trade whatever they have to gain what they need. And so you have trade within your society and within your culture, but then if you start really creating towards the latter half of the Neolithic era, people started creating much, much larger surpluses that allowed them to then trade with other civilizations who specialized in different types of agriculture and different types of artistry and artisan work. All right, so demographic, just to kind of tell you what demographic means, we're talking about the people, all right? That's their characteristics as humans. So Paleolithic demographic is people lived in very small groups, like 20 to 40, and they moved around. There wasn't any real settling, right? So they had to follow the animals, and if animals migrated, the animals that they specialized in or that they were hunting, if they migrated, then the people migrated with those migrating animals. In the Neolithic times, however, because they settled, there was a lot less migration happening, a lot less movement of people. And so what's going to happen is these people who are looking to settle and develop agricultural communities are going to look for fresh water sources and fertile land. And what's going to happen is these early civilizations are going to develop along river valleys where you have very fertile land and easy access to fresh water. Okay? So there are your notes. Hopefully you were able to fill out your spiced charts so that you have your notes.